In the dim glow of the old Victorian house on Elm Street, where the family had gathered for what felt like the 100th time under somber circumstances, Eleanor Thompson stood at the threshold, her coat still damp from the autumn rain that had chased her all the way from the airport. She was the eldest daughter, the one who had fled the small town of Willow Creek years ago in pursuit of a life less entangled in the webs of familial obligations. But now, with their mother's passing, she found herself pulled back into the orbit of siblings she barely recognized anymore. The house smelled of mothballs and faded lavender, a scent that transported her instantly to childhood afternoons spent hiding in the attic while her parents argued downstairs about money, secrets, and the unspoken resentments that had festered like untreated wounds. As she stepped into the living room, cluttered with half-unpacked boxes of mementos and wilting sympathy flowers, her brother Marcus was the first to notice her, his face a mask of forced composure beneath a beard that had grown unruly since their last video call 6 months prior. Marcus, the middle child and self-appointed family mediator, had always been the one to smooth over cracks, but today his eyes betrayed a weariness that suggested the cracks had widened into chasms during her absence. He enveloped her in a hug that felt more obligatory than warm, whispering about how glad he was she made it despite the flight delays, while in the background, their youngest sister, Leela, paced the kitchen, her phone glued to her ear as she coordinated with the funeral director about last-minute changes to the service. Leela, with her sharp bob haircut and designer blouse that seemed out of place amid the dated furniture, had taken the role of organizer, a position she relished for the control it afforded her in a family where chaos often reigned supreme. The air was thick with unspoken tensions as cousins and aunts milled about, offering platitudes that rang hollow against the backdrop of genuine grief mixed with the undercurrents of old grudges. Eleanor couldn't help but notice how the family portrait on the mantel, taken during a rare harmonious vacation to the lake 15 years ago, now seemed like a relic from another era, with smiles that hid the brewing storms. Their mother, Beatrice, had been the glue, the fierce matriarch who commanded respect through sheer willpower, her battle with cancer a prolonged siege that had tested everyone's limits differently. For Eleanor, it meant guilt-ridden phone calls from her apartment in the city where she built a career in publishing that demanded her full attention, leaving little room for the emotional labor back home. Marcus had shouldered the daily visits to the hospital, balancing them with his job at the local hardware store and his own family's needs, his wife Sarah hovering nearby now with a tray of sandwiches, her expression one of quiet support amid the unfamiliar relatives. Leela, ever the ambitious one, had flown in from her corporate life in Chicago only in the final weeks, her presence more logistical than tender, arranging hospice care with the efficiency of a boardroom negotiation. As the evening wore on, conversations splintered into small groups, uncles reminiscing about Beatrice's legendary apple pies, which she baked for every holiday without fail, their recipes a closely guarded secret that now felt like lost treasure. Nieces and nephews scrolling through old photo albums on the coffee table, giggling at outdated fashions while avoiding the heavier topics. Eleanor slipped away to the backyard, where the swing set from their childhood creaked in the wind, a reminder of simpler times when scraped knees were the biggest woes. She lit a cigarette, a habit she'd picked up in college and never quite shaken, inhaling deeply as memories flooded in, of summer barbecues where Beatrice orchestrated everything with a commanding presence, her laughter booming over the chatter, masking the subtle manipulations she employed to keep the family aligned. But beneath that facade, Eleanor knew, lay the secrets, the affair their father had years before his own untimely death in a car accident, which Beatrice had buried deep, only hinting at it in cryptic comments during late-night talks with her daughters. Marcus had always defended their mother's choices, seeing her as a victim of circumstance, while Leela dismissed it all as ancient history, irrelevant to their modern lives. Eleanor, though, carried the weight of knowing more, having stumbled upon letters in the attic one rainy afternoon as a teenager, letters that painted a picture of betrayal and forgiveness, intertwined in ways that complicated her view of family loyalty. Returning inside, she found the group migrating to the dining room for a makeshift dinner of casseroles brought by neighbors, the kind of gestures that small towns excelled at in times of loss. Conversations turned to the funeral arrangements, with debates over hymns and eulogies sparking minor flares. Should they include that poem Beatrice loved from her poetry club days, or keep it secular to avoid offending agnostic relatives? Marcus mediated with his usual diplomacy, suggesting compromises that satisfied no one fully but prevented outright arguments. Leela, checking her watch, mentioned her early flight back after the service, a comment that drew a sharp glance from Eleanor, who felt the sting of abandonment anew. As plates were cleared and coffee poured, the atmosphere shifted when Aunt Clara, Beatrice's outspoken sister, arrived fashionably late, her entrance dramatic with a flurry of air kisses and condolences laced with gossip about who hadn't shown up. Clara, with her dyed red hair and bold jewelry, had always been the wild card, the one who stirred pots just to see the reactions, and tonight was no exception, as she regaled the room with stories of Beatrice's youth, tales of dances and dreams deferred, that painted her mother in a youthful, vibrant light unfamiliar to her children. Eleanor listened, fascinated, yet uneasy, wondering how much of it was embellished for effect. The night deepened, and as people began to disperse to guest rooms or nearby hotels, Eleanor found herself alone in her childhood bedroom, the walls still adorned with posters of bands long forgotten, the bed sagging under the weight of accumulated years. Sleep evaded her, thoughts swirling around the impending funeral, the public display of grief where private pains would inevitably surface. She pondered the toast she might give, words that could honor without hypocrisy. But deep down, she sensed something brewing, a revelation, perhaps, that would alter the family's fragile equilibrium. Little did she know, as the clock ticked toward dawn, that the real surprise would come from an unexpected corner, setting the stage for disclosures that would unravel threads long thought secure. The rain persisted outside, a steady drum against the window, mirroring the persistent ache in her chest, a mix of sorrow for what was lost and apprehension for what lay ahead in the days to follow. The morning of the funeral arrived wrapped in a gray shroud of fog that clung to Willow Creek like a reluctant mourner refusing to leave. St. Agnes Catholic Church, its steeple piercing the low clouds, had stood on Maple Avenue since 1892, its red brick weathered by decades of Pennsylvania winters and the quiet dramas of small-town life. Inside, the pews filled slowly with faces Eleanor recognized from childhood birthday parties, high school graduations, and the occasional awkward encounter at the grocery store when she visited. The scent of incense mingled with the faint mustiness of old hymnals, creating an atmosphere both sacred and suffocating. She sat in the front row beside Marcus, whose suit jacket strained slightly at the shoulders, a sign of the weight he carried beyond fabric. Lila occupied the aisle seat, legs crossed tightly, scrolling discreetly through emails even now, her black dress impeccable, but her posture betraying impatience with the slow unfolding of ritual. Their mother's casket rested at the altar, polished mahogany gleaming under soft spotlighting, surrounded by white lilies and a single framed photograph of Beatrice at 45, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed she still had decades to shape the world around her. Father Michael, the same priest who had baptized all three siblings, began the service with a gentle voice that carried the practiced cadence of countless funerals. He spoke of Beatrice's devotion to family, her tireless volunteering at the food pantry, her sharp wit that could cut through pretense like a hot knife through butter. Eleanor listened half-heartedly, her mind drifting to the nights Beatrice had spent at the kitchen table, balancing checkbooks with furrowed concentration, determined that no child of hers would know the hunger she had known growing up during the lean years after her own father lost the family farm. The first reading came from Aunt Clara, who rose with theatrical grace, clutching the laminated card as though it were a prop in a one-woman show. Her voice rang out clear and slightly amplified by the microphone, reciting Psalm 23 with dramatic pauses that drew a few uncomfortable shifts in the pews behind them. When she finished, she lingered at the lectern a moment longer than necessary, dabbing at dry eyes before returning to her seat with the satisfied air of someone who had delivered a performance worth remembering. Next came the eulogy from Marcus. He stood at the podium, hands gripping the edges until his knuckles whitened, and began speaking of the woman who had taught him how to fix a leaky faucet, how to apologize without losing dignity, how to love fiercely, even when the object of that love made it difficult. His words were measured, heartfelt, occasionally cracking when he mentioned the final weeks in hospice, the way Beatrice had squeezed his hand and whispered that he had done enough, that it was time for him to rest too. Several people in the congregation reached for tissues. Even Lila's scrolling paused, her thumb hovering above the screen. Eleanor felt a pang of something close to envy, not for the tears Marcus drew, but for the uncomplicated grief he seemed able to express. Her own sorrow felt tangled in resentment, guilt, and a stubborn refusal to let the past dictate her present. When Marcus sat down, Father Michael invited anyone who wished to share a memory to come forward. A cousin spoke of Beatrice's legendary Christmas cookies, the ones with the perfect dusting of powdered sugar that never seemed to melt. An old neighbor recounted how Beatrice had sat with her through the night when her husband passed, brewing tea and listening without judgment. Each story added another layer to the portrait being painted of a woman larger than life, almost saintly in retrospect. Then, the microphone stood empty for a long moment. No one else moved. Eleanor felt the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders, though she had told no one she intended to speak. She rose slowly, smoothing the front of her charcoal dress, and walked to the front. The church seemed quieter now, the creak of pews and muffled coughs fading into a collective, held breath. She adjusted the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some wary, a few openly tearful, and began. "My mother was not an easy woman," she said, the words landing heavier than she anticipated. A ripple of surprise moved through the congregation. Marcus straightened. Lila's head snapped up. Eleanor continued, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "My mother loved us with a force that sometimes felt like possession rather than affection. She wanted the best for us, but her definition of best rarely matched ours. She kept secrets the way other people collect coins, carefully, obsessively, convinced they were valuable even when they weighed us all down." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "But she also taught me how to stand up straight when the world tried to bend me. She showed me survival isn't always quiet or pretty, and for that, I will always be grateful." The words felt inadequate, too honest for the polished occasion, yet they were the truest thing she could offer. She returned to her seat amid a hush that bordered on discomfort. Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture that said more than words could. The service continued. More prayers, the sprinkling of holy water, the final commendation. As pallbearers carried the casket down the aisle, Eleanor walked behind with her siblings, eyes fixed on the flower-draped wood that now contained everything physical that remained of Beatrice Thompson. Outside, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing a pale sun struggling through the overcast. Mourners gathered in small clusters on the church lawn, exchanging hugs and quiet condolences. Several people approached Eleanor to tell her how brave her words had been, though their tone suggested they meant controversial rather than courageous. She accepted the compliments with a tight smile, already regretting the rawness she had exposed. The burial at Willow Creek Cemetery followed, a short procession of cars winding through town. The graveside service was brief, a final prayer, the lowering of the casket, and the symbolic handfuls of earth. Eleanor watched dirt fall into polished wood and felt the finality settle deep in her bones. Afterward, the family returned to the house on Elm Street for the reception. Neighbors had set up folding tables in the dining and living rooms, laden with deviled eggs, ham sandwiches, fruit trays, and endless casseroles still warm from sympathetic ovens. Conversation flowed in subdued waves, reminiscences, gentle teasing about old family quirks, questions about when everyone planned to leave town again. Eleanor moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting hugs, nodding at compliments on her eulogy, deflecting questions about her life in the city. She noticed how Marcus stayed close to Sarah and their 2 teenage sons, drawing strength from their presence, while Lila worked the room like a politician, collecting business cards and promising to follow up on vague job leads mentioned in passing. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd thinned. Relatives began their goodbyes, promising to stay in touch, knowing most wouldn't. Eventually, only the immediate family remained, along with Aunt Clara, who had appointed herself unofficial bartender, pouring generous measures of whiskey into mismatched glasses. They settled in the living room, the same room where they had opened Christmas presents, argued over board games, and once watched their father leave for the last time. Clara raised her glass first. "To Beatrice," she said, voice thick, "the toughest broad I ever knew." Glasses clinked. Then Marcus spoke, voice soft. "To Mom, may she finally have peace." Another clink. Lila added, almost reluctantly, "To moving forward." Eleanor remained silent, staring into the amber liquor. The room grew quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes something irreversible. She felt the weight of unsaid things pressing against her ribs. Then, unexpectedly, Lila set her glass down with deliberate care. "There's something we need to talk about before we scatter again." All eyes turned to her. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She had come prepared for grief, for nostalgia, even for conflict, but not for whatever truth Lila was about to unearth. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes in slow suspension, as though time itself paused to listen. And in that suspended moment, the family that had spent decades avoiding certain conversations suddenly found itself on the edge of one that could not be postponed any longer. Lila's announcement hung in the living room like smoke from a freshly extinguished match. Sharp, lingering, impossible to ignore. The remaining family members froze in various states of recline. Marcus on the worn armchair with his elbows on his knees, Sarah standing behind him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, Aunt Clara perched on the edge of the ottoman, still holding her half-empty whiskey glass, and Eleanor herself standing near the fireplace, arms crossed as though bracing for impact. The only sound for several long seconds was the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a metronome marking the seconds until someone spoke again. Lila cleared her throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. "I found something," she said. "In Mom's bedroom. Yesterday, while I was looking for the insurance papers she kept promising were in the top drawer." She reached into the slim leather tote she always carried, the one that looked more suited to board meetings than grief, and withdrew a plain manila envelope, unsealed, slightly yellowed at the edges. The handwriting on the front was Beatrice's unmistakable cursive. "For my children, to be read together after I'm gone." No name, no date, just that simple directive. Eleanor felt her stomach drop the way it had when she was 12 and realized she'd forgotten to study for a history test she was about to walk into. Marcus leaned forward. "You opened it already?" Lila nodded once, briskly. "I did. I wasn't going to wait for permission from a dead woman." Clara let out a low whistle. "That's cold, even for you, kid." Lila ignored her. "There's a letter inside, and something else." She slid a single sheet of stationery from the envelope and unfolded it with careful fingers. The paper was the heavy cream stock Beatrice had always favored for thank you notes. Lila began to read aloud, her voice steady but quieter than usual. "My dearest ones, if you are reading this, I have finally left you in peace. Or at least I hope I have. There are things I never said while I was alive because saying them would have meant admitting I was wrong, and I have spent most of my life being right, or at least convincing myself I was. I owe you the truth now, even if it arrives too late to change anything. I kept a secret from you all, not because I was ashamed, though perhaps I should have been, but because I believed protecting you from it was the last gift I could give your father. He died believing no one else knew. I let him carry that belief to his grave. But secrets have weight, and I have grown tired of carrying this one alone. Your father did not die in a simple car accident on Route 44. There was no deer, no sudden swerve, no mechanical failure. He drove into that tree deliberately. He took his own life, and I helped him plan it." The room seemed to shrink. Eleanor heard her own pulse roaring in her ears. Marcus made a small choked sound. Sarah's hand tightened on his shoulder. Clara set her glass down with deliberate slowness, as though sudden movement might shatter something fragile. Lila continued reading without looking up. "He was sick. Very sick, in a way the doctors never caught because he refused the tests. Pancreatic cancer, late stage. He didn't want chemo, didn't want hospitals, didn't want to waste what little time he had left being poked and prodded. He wanted to go out on his own terms. I fought him at first, I begged, I cried, but in the end I understood. So I helped him choose the spot, the speed, the moment. I made sure the children were at school. I kissed him goodbye that morning like it was any other Tuesday. Then I waited for the call. I have lived with that choice every day since. Some days it feels like mercy, others like murder. You will decide for yourselves what it was. I only ask that you do not hate me for loving him enough to let him go the way he wanted. There is one more thing. In the bottom of my jewelry box, under the velvet lining, you will find a key. It opens a safe deposit box at First National on Broad Street, box 417. Inside are the documents, the medical reports he hid, the letter he wrote to me the night before, the insurance policy that paid out because we made it look like an accident. Destroy them if you want, keep them if you need proof. I no longer care either way. I loved you all more than I ever knew how to show. Forgive me if you can. If you can't, at least try not to let this poison what remains between you. Your mother, always, Beatrice. Leela stopped reading. The paper trembled slightly in her hand before she refolded it and returned it to the envelope. No one spoke for what felt like minutes. Then Marcus stood up abruptly, walked to the window, and stared out at the darkening street without seeming to see it. She helped him, he said, quietly, more to himself than anyone. All these years, she let us think it was just bad luck, a stupid accident. Eleanor felt something hot and sharp rise in her throat. Anger, grief, confusion, all braided together so tightly she couldn't separate the strands. Sarah broke the silence first. What do we do with the key? She asked gently. Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound. We go to the bank tomorrow, we open the box, we see what's really there. And then? Eleanor asked. No one answered right away. Clara finally spoke. Then we decide whether to hate her, forgive her, or just keep breathing. Same choices we've always had. The room settled into a heavy quiet again. Outside, the first stars appeared above the rooftops of Willow Creek, indifferent to the upheaval happening beneath them. Inside, the family sat with the weight of a 23-year-old lie suddenly made flesh. No one suggested going to bed, no one suggested calling it a night. They simply stayed where they were, passing the envelope from hand to hand like a live grenade whose pin had already been pulled. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. The clock kept ticking, and in the stillness between heartbeats, each of them began, silently, separately, to rewrite every memory they thought they understood. The next morning arrived brittle and cold, the kind of November day where the sky looks scraped clean and the air bites at exposed skin. Eleanor woke on the living room couch, neck stiff, blanket twisted around her legs, the manila envelope resting on the coffee table like an accusation nobody had the courage to move. Someone, probably Sarah, had made coffee during the night. The pot sat half full on the kitchen counter, still warm. Eleanor poured a mug, black, and drank it standing at the sink, staring out at the backyard where frost had silvered the grass and the old swing set looked like a skeleton in the pale light. Marcus appeared first, already dressed in yesterday's clothes, eyes red-rimmed but steady. Bank opens at 9, he said without preamble. We should go early. Beat the line. Leela came down the stairs a minute later, hair pulled into a tight knot, carrying the envelope and a small velvet jewelry box she must have retrieved from their mother's room some time after the rest of them finally stumbled to bed. Clara had left the night before, claiming a headache and a need for her own 4 walls, but not before pressing a kiss to each of their foreheads and murmuring, "Don't tear each other apart over this." She wouldn't want that. Whether she believed her own words was impossible to tell. Sarah offered to stay behind with the boys, who were still sleeping upstairs, and no one argued. The 3 siblings climbed into Marcus's pickup truck, Eleanor in the back, Leela shotgun, Marcus driving with both hands tight on the wheel. The heater rattled and blew lukewarm air that smelled faintly of motor oil and pine air freshener. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes. The radio stayed off. Willow Creek rolled past in familiar fragments. The hardware store where Marcus worked, the diner where Beatrice used to meet her book club every third Thursday, the turnoff to the high school where all 3 of them had once walked the same hallways wearing the same green and gold colors. First National Bank sat on the corner of Broad and Maple, a squat brick building with tall windows and an American flag snapping in the wind. The parking lot held only 3 cars when they pulled in at 8:47. Inside, the lobby smelled of paper and carpet cleaner. A teller named Brenda, name tag gleaming, smile practiced, greeted them with the cautious warmth people reserve for those who have recently buried someone. Marcus explained they needed access to a safe deposit box. Brenda asked for ID, the key, and the box number. Leela handed over all 3 without flourish. A short wait later, they were led to the vault. The safe deposit boxes lined the walls like a grid of locked secrets. Brenda located 417, slid her master key into one slot, and stepped back so Leela could insert the one from the jewelry box. The small door opened with a soft metallic click. Inside lay a single, expandable folder, TAM, fastened with a rubber band gone brittle with age. No lockbox, no jewelry, no stacks of cash. Just papers. Brenda excused herself, saying she'd give them privacy in the small viewing room next door. The 3 of them filed in, closing the door behind them. Marcus set the folder on the table. For a moment, none of them moved, as though touching it might make everything real in a way the letter had not yet managed. Finally, Eleanor reached forward and slipped the rubber band free. The folder contained 4 items. First, a medical report dated March 12, 2001, from a specialist in Philadelphia. Pancreatic adenocarcinoma, stage 4. Prognosis, 6 to 9 months with treatment, considerably less without. Handwritten notes in the margin in their father's tight, slanted script. No chemo, no surgery, no point. Second, a single sheet of yellow legal paper, folded once, dated March 18, 2001, the night before the accident. Their father's handwriting again, addressed to Beatrice. B. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. I'm sorry for the cowardice of it, but I couldn't face another round of tests, another round of you watching me waste away. You've given me 32 good years and 3 beautiful kids. That's more than most get. Don't let them hate you for this. Tell them I was tired. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. Just don't let them hate you. I love you past words. Take care of them. Take care of yourself when you can. Take care of them. Tom. Third, a life insurance policy declaration stamped paid in full, dated 6 weeks after the funeral. $1,200,000. Beneficiary, Beatrice Thompson, spouse. Cause of death listed as accidental. Fourth, a single photograph, slightly curled at the edges. Tom and Beatrice on the back porch. Summer, maybe 1998? He had his arm around his waist. She was laughing, head thrown back, sunlight catching her hair. On the back, in Beatrice's writing, the last summer we were whole. Eleanor felt something give way inside her chest. Not tears exactly, but a pressure that had lived there so long she hadn't noticed it until it moved. She passed each item to Marcus, then to Leela. They read in silence, turning pages with the care one might use to handle something explosive. When they finished, the room stayed quiet, except for the low hum of the building's ventilation. Marcus spoke first, voice rough. He didn't want us to see him die. Leela nodded slowly. And she didn't want us to see him suffer. Eleanor stared at the photograph. She lied to protect us from the truth, and then she spent the next 23 years protecting us from the lie. Marcus rubbed a hand over his face. I spent years being angry at him, quietly, for leaving us, for not fighting harder. I thought he gave up. He did, but not on us, on his body. Eleanor traced a finger along the edge of the legal paper. She carried this alone, every single day. They sat with that for a while. Eventually, Marcus gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, refastened the rubber band. What do we do now? Marcus asked. Burn it? Leela shook her head. No, we keep it. Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can decide later whether the kids ever need to know. Eleanor looked between them. And us? Do we forgive her? Marcus exhaled. I don't know yet. I'm still trying to forgive him. Leela closed the folder. Maybe we don't have to decide today. Maybe we just carry it, the way she did. They left the viewing room, returned the folder to the box, locked it again. Brenda reappeared, all polite efficiency, and escorted them back to the lobby. Outside, the cold slapped their faces. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, none of them quite ready to get back into the truck. A few early shoppers moved past, carrying paper bags and talking about ordinary things. Eleanor felt strangely detached, as though she were watching her own life from several paces behind. Marcus finally spoke. We should tell Sarah. Tonight, Leela said, after the boys are in bed. Eleanor nodded. And Clara, she deserves to know too. They climbed back into the truck. This time, Marcus turned on the radio, low, some old country station playing a song about regret and second chances. No one changed the station. The drive home felt longer than the drive there, even though it was the same distance. When they pulled into the driveway, Sarah was waiting on the porch, arms wrapped around her against the chill. She didn't ask what they had found. She simply looked at their faces and nodded once, as though she already understood that whatever was inside the box had changed the shape of the grief they'd carried into the bank. They went inside together. The house still smelled faintly of lilies and coffee. The envelope still sat on the coffee table. Nothing looked different. Everything had shifted. The house on Elm Street felt smaller after the bank visit, as though the walls themselves had drawn inward to contain the newly unpacked truth. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the half-drawn blinds, striping the living room carpet in gold and shadow. But the warmth didn't reach the corners where silence had settled. Sarah had taken the boys to the park, ostensibly to give them fresh air, though everyone understood it was to give the adults space to breathe without performing normalcy for teenage eyes. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, elbows planted, staring at the folder they had brought back from First National as though it might speak if he waited long enough. Lila paced the length of the hallway, phone in hand but screen dark. She hadn't checked email since they left the bank. Eleanor stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching a neighbor rake leaves into neat piles across the street. The ordinary motion of it, scrape, lift, drop, felt almost obscene in its simplicity. We should eat something, Marcus said at last, the words sounding rehearsed, like lines from a script no one had bothered to memorize properly. No one moved to make food. Lila stopped pacing long enough to lean against the doorframe. I keep thinking about the insurance money, she said. $1 million, too. She never touched most of it. The house was paid off before Dad died. She lived on his pension and her part-time bookkeeping. The rest just sat there. Eleanor turned from the window. She probably thought spending it would make the lie more real, like if she bought a new car or took a cruise, someone would ask questions. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. Or maybe she couldn't bear to profit from it, even if it was what he wanted. The folder lay open now on the table. The photograph of their parents on the porch stared up at them, Tom's arm around Beatrice, her laughter frozen mid-breath. Eleanor reached out and turned it face down without thinking. I don't want to look at them happy right now, she said, not when I know what came after. Lila crossed to the table and sat. Do we tell the boys? The question landed like a stone in still water. Marcus exhaled slowly. They're 15 and 17, old enough to understand death isn't always an accident, old enough to Google things if they get curious later, but are they old enough to carry this? Are we? Eleanor countered. No one answered. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times, each note deliberate and unhurried. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, bass vibrating through the floorboards. Life continued its indifferent rhythm, indifferent to the fracture that had opened inside these walls. Sarah returned just before 4, cheeks flushed from the cold, boys trailing behind her with soccer balls under their arms. The younger one, Ethan, launched immediately into a story about a kid at the park who couldn't kick straight. The older, Caleb, rolled his eyes but listened anyway. For a few minutes, the house filled with the ordinary noise of teenagers, shoes thumping, refrigerator opening, voices overlapping, and the adults clung to it like lifelines. Dinner was simple. Reheated casseroles from the funeral, salad Sarah threw together, store-bought rolls. They ate in the dining room instead of the kitchen, a small formality that felt necessary. Conversation stayed surface level, school projects, the upcoming basketball season, whether the Steelers had any chance this year. No one mentioned the folder, the letter, the photograph. After the dishes were cleared, Sarah quietly suggested the boys go upstairs to finish homework or play video games. They went without protest, sensing the shift in the air the way animals sense a storm before the clouds arrive. When the 4 adults were alone again, Sarah spoke first. "I read the letter while you were gone," she said. "Marcus showed me. I'm not family by blood, but I've been here 20 years. I need to say something." She looked at each of them in turn. "Your mother didn't do this to hurt you. She did it to spare you. And maybe that was wrong. Maybe the truth would have been kinder in the long run. But she made the choice out of love. Messy, terrified love. The kind that doesn't always look noble from the outside." Marcus reached for her hand across the table. "I know that in my head. My heart's still catching up." Lila folded her arms. "I keep wondering if she told Aunt Clara. Clara was always closer to Dad. They used to smoke on the back steps and talk for hours." Eleanor shook her head. "If she told anyone, it would have been Clara, but Clara can't keep a secret to save her life." "Then Mom carried it completely alone, for 23 years. The realization settled over them again, heavier this time. Eleanor stood up, needing to move. She walked to the back door and stepped onto the porch. The night air was sharp, smelling of wood smoke and damp leaves. She leaned against the railing, staring at the dark shapes of the yard. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Lila joined her, hands in her pockets. "You were quiet at dinner," Lila said. "More than usual." Eleanor gave a small, humorless laugh. "I'm trying to decide if I'm angry. At her, at him, at both of them for deciding we didn't deserve to know. And I think I'm angrier that they thought we couldn't handle it, that we were too fragile, or too young. Forever." Lila nodded slowly. "I get that, but maybe they weren't wrong. We were kids when it happened, and even now, look at us. We're still figuring out how to carry it." They stood in silence for a while, breath fogging in the cold. Inside, Marcus and Sarah's voices murmured low, a soft counterpoint to the night. Eventually, Eleanor spoke again. "I think we should call Clara tomorrow. Tell her everything. She loved them both. She deserves the full picture." "Agreed. And then what?" Eleanor shrugged. "Then we live with it, same as Mom did, only we do it together." They went back inside. Marcus had moved to the living room, the folder closed on the coffee table again. Sarah sat beside him, head on his shoulder. No one suggested opening it. Instead, Marcus looked up. "I think I want to go to the spot, where it happened. Route 44, the curve by the big oak. I haven't been there since the funeral." Lila raised her eyebrow. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he confirmed. "Before we scatter again. Before life pulls us in different directions and this becomes something we only talk about at Christmas." Eleanor felt a strange relief at the idea. Not closure, nothing so tidy, but a kind of witnessing, a way to stand in the place where the lie was born and see if the truth looked different up close. They agreed. Plans were made quietly. Breakfast early, drive out together, no rush to return. Sarah would stay with the boys, keep things steady at home. When the conversation wound down, exhaustion finally overtook them. They drifted to separate rooms, Marcus and Sarah to the guest bedroom, Lila to her old room upstairs, Eleanor back to the couch with its familiar sag. She lay awake a long time, listening to the house settle. Floorboards creaked, the furnace clicked on. Somewhere, a branch tapped the window like a hesitant visitor. In the darkness, she thought about her mother. Not the mythologized version from the funeral, not the secretive architect of a perfect deception, but the woman who had sat alone at the same kitchen table night after night, paying bills, planning meals, carrying a weight no one else could see. For the first time since the envelope appeared, Eleanor felt something close to tenderness instead of fury. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that love, even when it fails spectacularly, is still love. She closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, but when it arrived, it was deep and dreamless. Outside, the stars wheeled above Willow Creek, cold and constant, bearing witness to another ordinary night made extraordinary by the truths it held. Dawn broke thin and reluctant over Willow Creek, the kind of pale November light that promised nothing but delivered frost on every surface. Marcus was up first, brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead, the percolator gurgling like an old friend who refused to stay quiet. He moved through the kitchen with deliberate slowness, measuring grounds, filling the pot, setting out mugs as though the routine itself could impose order on a day that refused to be ordinary. Sarah appeared next, hair still mussed from sleep, wrapping her arms around him from behind for a long moment before speaking. "You sure about this?" she asked against his shoulder. He nodded once. "Need to see it. Not the crash site exactly. Police cleared everything years ago, but the place, the tree, the curve. I've driven past it 1,000 times and pretended it was just another bend in the road. Eleanor came down the stairs barefoot, wearing yesterday's sweater over leggings, eyes shadowed but alert. Leela followed minutes later, already dressed in black jeans and a wool coat, the folder tucked under her arm like a briefcase she couldn't afford to lose. They ate standing up. Toast, scrambled eggs Sarah insisted on making, coffee that scalded tongues but no one complained. Conversation stayed minimal. Weather report, cold, possible flurries later. Traffic on the interstate, light this early. Who would drive? Marcus, no discussion. The boys were still asleep upstairs. Sarah would wake them later, feed them pancakes, keep the day normal until the adults returned. At 7:42, they climbed into the pickup again. This time, the heater worked properly, blowing warm air scented with nothing more sinister than motor oil. Marcus took the long way out of town, avoiding Main Street where people might wave and ask how they were holding up. Route 44 unrolled ahead like a gray ribbon stitched through bare trees and rolling farmland. The road hadn't changed much in 23 years. Same 2 lanes, same faded centerline, same occasional deer crossing signs pocked with buckshot. They passed the old feed store, the abandoned gas station with its rusted pumps, the turnoff to the quarry where kids used to dare each other to jump the ledge into deep water. No one commented. The curve appeared without fanfare. One moment the road ran straight. The next it bent sharply left around a stand of ancient oaks, their trunks thick as small cars, branches stripped bare by winter. Marcus slowed without being asked. He pulled onto the narrow shoulder where gravel gave way to dead grass. The truck idled. They sat for a full minute before anyone moved. Eleanor spoke first. "That's the one, isn't it? Second from the left. The one with the scar." Marcus nodded. Years ago, someone had tried to paint over the long vertical gash in the bark, white paint that had since peeled and grayed, but the wound remained, wider at the base, a permanent record of impact. They stepped out into the cold. Wind moved through the branches with a low, constant sigh. Gravel crunched under boots. Marcus walked to the tree first, reaching out to touch the scar as though confirming it was real. His fingers traced the rough edges. "He hit it dead center," he said quietly. "Going fast enough, they said there was no chance." Leela stood a few paces back, arms folded tight. "He chose it. Mom said so in the letter. Wide enough to take the whole car. No chance anyone else would be hurt." Eleanor circled the tree slowly, looking up at the canopy that would have been green that March morning. She tried to picture it. Their father behind the wheel of the old Buick, hands steady, eyes fixed ahead, knowing this was the last curve he would ever take. Did he think of them in that final second? Did he whisper their names, or did he simply let the road pull him in? She pressed her palm against the bark opposite the scar. It felt cold, alive, in the stubborn way old trees are alive. "I used to hate this road. Every time I came home from the city, I'd hold my breath until we passed it. Like if I didn't look, it couldn't hurt." Marcus turned to her. "I still do that, every damn time." Leela stepped closer. She drove it too, every week to the cemetery, never said a word about how it must have felt. They stood in a loose semicircle around the tree, 3 siblings and 1 scarred oak bearing witness to a decision made in darkness. No one cried. The grief wasn't fresh enough for tears anymore. It had hardened into something quieter, more durable. Marcus finally spoke again. "I think I understand why he didn't tell us. He didn't want us watching him fade, didn't want hospital rooms and machines and pity. But her," he trailed off. Eleanor finished for him. "She chose to carry the aftermath alone so we didn't have to. That's the part I can't quite forgive yet. Not because it was wrong, maybe it was right for him, but because she decided our strength for us." Leela exhaled, breath clouding. She was terrified we'd hate her. That's why the letter waited until after she was gone. She wanted us to grieve first, get the anger out on a dead woman instead of a living one. Marcus looked up at the sky, pale and featureless. "I don't hate her. I'm just tired of all the years we spent not knowing." A pickup, much like Marcus's, passed on the opposite lane, driver lifting 2 fingers from the wheel in the automatic country greeting. Marcus returned the gesture without thinking. The normalcy of it jarred them back to the present. They lingered a few minutes more, each touching the tree one last time, as though sealing something unspoken. Then they walked back to the truck in silence. No one suggested photographs. No one needed proof they'd been here. On the drive home, Marcus took a different route, winding through back roads lined with corn stubble and frost-covered fences. The radio stayed off. Halfway there, Leela spoke from the passenger seat. "We should plant something. Not here, too close to the road, but somewhere. A tree, a bench, something living." Eleanor nodded slowly. "At the cemetery, near her stone. Something that grows tall enough to see from the highway." Marcus considered it. Maple. They turn red in fall. She always liked that. It wasn't a plan yet, just a seed, but it felt like forward motion. When they pulled into the driveway, Sarah was waiting on the porch again, this time with mugs of fresh coffee. The boys were inside playing video games. Laughter drifted through the open door. Sarah looked at their faces and didn't ask questions. She simply handed out the mugs and stepped aside so they could enter the warmth of the house. Inside, the folder still waited on the coffee table, but no one moved to open it. Instead, Marcus set his mug down and pulled Sarah into a long hug. Leela disappeared upstairs to call her office and push her return flight another day. Eleanor went to the kitchen, opened the recipe box their mother had kept on the windowsill, and began flipping through cards until she found the one for apple pie, the one that Beatrice had written in careful cursive, margins filled with notes about cinnamon and lattice crust. She set it on the counter. "We're making pie, the way she did, crust from scratch." Sarah appeared in the doorway, smiling for the first time in days. "I'll peel apples." Marcus joined them, rolling up his sleeves. "I'll make the crumble topping. She always let me do that part." Leela came back down, phone off, sleeves pushed up. "I'll handle the filling. I remember her trick with the lemon zest." They worked side by side in the small kitchen, elbows brushing, voices low and overlapping. No one mentioned Route 44, no one mentioned the letter, but the air felt lighter somehow, as though the simple act of measuring flour and slicing fruit could stitch something back together. The pie went into the oven, the house filled with the smell of cinnamon and browning sugar. Upstairs, the boys shouted over a video game victory. Outside, the wind moved through bare branches, and for the first time since the envelope appeared, the family occupied the same space without the weight of secrets pressing down quite so hard. It wasn't resolution, it was only a beginning, but beginnings, they were learning, could be enough for one ordinary afternoon. The oven timer buzzed at exactly 4:17, a shrill reminder that cut through the low hum of conversation in the kitchen. Eleanor pulled the pie out with mitts that had once belonged to Beatrice, faded red gingham, edges frayed from decades of use, and set it on the cooling rack. Steam rose in fragrant curls, carrying cinnamon, nutmeg, browned butter, and the faint tartness of Granny Smith apples sliced thin enough to melt on the tongue. The lattice crust had cracked in 3 places during baking, golden brown edges curling slightly, but no one commented on the imperfections. Imperfections, they were learning, were part of the inheritance. Marcus leaned over the counter and inhaled deeply. "Smells exactly like hers," he said, voice rough around the edges. Sarah smiled, wiping flour from her hands onto a dish towel. She always said the secret was patience. Let the dough rest. Let the apples sweat a little before you add the sugar. Leela, who had been quietly zesting a second lemon just in case, set the microplane down. She never measured the cinnamon, just shook the jar until it looked right. They stood around the pie in a loose circle, as though it were a small altar. No one suggested cutting it yet. The warmth from the oven lingered in the room, softening the chill that had followed them home from Route 44. Upstairs, the muffled thump of video game gunfire continued. The boys had no idea the adults downstairs were performing a quiet ritual of reclamation. Eleanor broke the silence first. "We should call Clara tonight, before we lose our nerve." Marcus nodded. "She'll want to know everything, and she'll probably cry louder than any of us did." Leela pulled her phone from her pocket, thumb hovering over the contacts. "Speaker?" "Speaker," the others agreed. Clara answered on the second ring, voice bright and slightly out of breath. "Well, if it isn't the 3 Musketeers, you surviving over there?" Marcus cleared his throat. "We went to the Curve this morning." A pause on the other end. When Clara spoke again, her tone had dropped an octave. "Route 44? "Yeah." Another pause, longer. "And?" Leela took over, voice steady. "We found the tree. The scar's still there. We stood around it for a while, talked about why he chose it, why she helped." Static crackled faintly on the line. Then Clara let out a long, shaky breath. "Jesus, you kids finally know." Eleanor leaned closer to the phone. "You knew?" "Not the details," Clara said quickly. "Not the planning part, but I suspected. Tom was different those last months. Quieter. He'd look at Beatrice like he was memorizing her, and she'd look back the same way. I asked her once, point blank, if something was wrong. She just smiled that tight little smile of hers and said, 'Everything's fine, Clara. Mind your own damn business.' I let it go, thought maybe it was money trouble or one of you acting up. Never imagined." Her voice cracked. "I should have pushed harder." "None of us pushed," Marcus said quietly. "We were kids. We trusted them." Clara gave a watery laugh. "I wasn't a kid. I was her sister. I should have seen it." Silence stretched again, comfortable this time, the kind that comes after something heavy has been set down. Clara spoke next. "Did you open the box?" "We did," Leela answered. "Medical report, his goodbye letter, the insurance payout, a photo of them on the porch." Clara exhaled sharply. "He wrote her a letter?" "The night before," Marcus confirmed. "Told her not to let us hate her." A soft sob came through the speaker. "That sounds like Tom, always thinking about everyone else, even when he was planning to leave." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "Clara, did she ever talk to you about it, after?" "Not a word. Not one. She acted like it was a regular accident from day one. Cried at the funeral, sure, but so did everyone. She buried it so deep, I started doubting my own instincts. Figured I was reading too much into things because I missed him too." Leela traced the edge of the cooling rack with a finger. "She carried it alone. All of it." "That was Beatrice," said Clara. "Stubborn as hell. Thought if she held something tight enough it couldn't hurt anyone else." Marcus rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. "We made pie. Her apple pie. Crust from scratch." Clara laughed through tears. "Of course you did. She'd be proud, probably standing over your shoulder right now telling you the lattice is too loose." They all chuckled, small and surprised at the sound. The tension in the kitchen eased another fraction. "Come over tomorrow," Clara said suddenly, "before Leela flies back. Bring the pie if there's any left. We'll sit on my porch, drink something stronger than coffee, and tell stories about them. The real ones, not the funeral versions." "We'll be there," Marcus promised. "Around noon?" "Noon's perfect." "And Marcus?" "Yeah?" "Don't let this break you 3 apart. Your mother spent her whole life keeping this family stitched together. Don't undo it now." "We won't," he said. They said goodbyes, promises to text arrival times, assurances that everyone was still breathing. When the call ended, the kitchen felt warmer, less haunted. Sarah slipped upstairs to check on the boys. The siblings stayed where they were, watching steam rise from the pie in lazy spirals. Eventually, Eleanor reached for a knife. "We should taste it, see if we got it right." Marcus handed plates. Leela found forks. They cut 4 small slices, generous, not stingy, and passed them around. The first bite was hot, sweet tart, flaky crust giving way to soft apple. It tasted like childhood, like arguments resolved over dessert, like Beatrice standing at the stove with flour on her cheek, humming off key. No one spoke while they ate. Words felt unnecessary. When the slices were gone, Marcus set his fork down. "It's good," he said simply. "Not perfect, but good." Leela nodded. She'd say we overdid the nutmeg. Eleanor smiled faintly. She'd say we did it our way, and that's enough. Night fell slowly outside the windows. Streetlights flickered on. Inside, the house settled into its familiar creaks and sighs. The boys came downstairs eventually, drawn by the smell, begging for seconds. The adults let them have as much as they wanted, watching their sons devour pie with the uncomplicated joy only teenagers can manage. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor stayed up alone in the living room. The folder still sat on the coffee table, closed. She didn't open it. Instead, she pulled a throw blanket over her legs, leaned back against the couch cushions, and stared at the ceiling where faint water stains from a long-ago leak still bloomed like pale flowers. She thought about tomorrow, Clara's porch, more stories, more truth. She thought about the tree on Route 44, scarred but standing. She thought about the pie cooling in the kitchen, imperfect but shared. And for the first time since the funeral, she felt something loosen inside her chest. Not gone, not yet, but loosening. Enough to let a little air in, enough to let her breathe around the grief instead of through it. Outside, a light snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering Willow Creek in a thin white veil. The house slept. The pie sat on the counter under a clean towel. And somewhere in the quiet, the family kept moving forward, one small, ordinary step at a time. The snow that had begun the night before continued falling through the morning, soft and steady, blanketing Willow Creek in a hush that felt almost deliberate. By 10 o'clock, the streets were quiet, tire tracks faint and quickly filling in, rooftops rounded white. Clara's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac on the west side of town, a modest ranch style with wide windows and a porch that wrapped around two sides like an open invitation. Smoke curled from the chimney, the smell of wood burning reached them before they even turned into the driveway. Marcus parked behind Clara's old Subaru, its hood already dusted with fresh powder. They stepped out carrying the remaining half of the apple pie wrapped in foil, plus a thermos of coffee Sarah had insisted they bring. Clara opened the door before they could knock, wearing a thick cardigan the color of dried cranberries and wool socks with reindeer on them. Her eyes were red, but bright. "Get in here before you freeze," she said, waving them inside with both hands. The living room was warm, cluttered in the comforting way of someone who had lived long enough to accumulate stories instead of things. Framed photographs on every surface, Afghans draped over chair backs, a small artificial Christmas tree already up in the corner even though it was only mid-November. Clara had set out plates, forks, napkins, and a bottle of bourbon on the coffee table. No pretense of formality. They settled onto the couch in armchairs, pie unwrapped and sliced, coffee poured, bourbon offered but declined by all except Clara, who poured herself a generous finger and raised it in silent toast before sipping. "To Tom and Bee," she said. "May they finally rest easy knowing the truth is out." Glasses clinked, coffee mugs mostly. They ate pie slowly, savoring each bite, letting the sweetness linger. No one rushed into conversation. The fire crackled. Snow tapped gently against the window panes. Eventually, Clara set her plate down. "Tell me about the curve," she said. "Everything." Marcus started, voice low. He described the tree, the scar, the way the bark still remembered the impact. Eleanor added the quiet of the place, how the road felt smaller than she remembered, how standing there made the past feel both impossibly distant and close enough to touch. Leela spoke last about the photograph from the safe deposit box, the way their parents looked in that last summer, whole, unguarded, unaware of the shadow already creeping closer. Clara listened without interrupting, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. When they finished, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her cardigan. "I have something for you," she said. She rose and went to a small secretary desk in the corner, opened a drawer, and returned with a thin bundle of envelopes tied with kitchen twine. "These were in the attic after Tom died. Bee asked me to hold them, said she couldn't keep them in the house, but couldn't throw them away either." She handed the bundle to Marcus. The top envelope was addressed to him in Beatrice's handwriting. The others were labeled similarly, one for Eleanor, one for Leela, one simply, "For the grandchildren when they're old enough." Marcus untied the twine with careful fingers. Inside his envelope was a single sheet of the same cream stationery. "Marcus, my steady boy, you were always the one who fixed things. Leaky faucets, broken toys, broken hearts when you could. I know you've been trying to fix this family since the day your father left us. Stop trying so hard. Some breaks are meant to stay open so light can get in. I'm sorry I let you carry guilt for not being there more. You were there exactly as much as you could be. That was enough. Be proud of the man you've become. Sarah is lucky, your boys are lucky, and I was the luckiest of all to watch you grow. Love you past words. Mom." He read it silently, then passed it to Sarah, who had joined them quietly after dropping the boys at a friend's house. Tears slipped down her face as she read. Eleanor opened hers next. "Eleanor, my runaway. You left because you had to. I know that now. I pushed too hard, wanted too much control. I was afraid if I let you go completely, I'd lose you the way I lost pieces of myself over the years. You built something beautiful out there. Don't ever apologize for it, but come home sometimes. Not out of duty, just because the door is open and there's coffee on. I forgave myself a little when I realized you were living the life I was too scared to chase. Be brave for both of us. Always your mother, B." Eleanor folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest. Leela's envelope held a shorter note. Leela, my sharp one. You see the world in straight lines and clean edges. I never did. That's why we clashed so much. But I admire it. You'll move mountains with that mind of yours. Don't let grief make you harder than you already are. Let it soften you instead. It's the only thing that ever softened me. I'm proud of you, even when I didn't say it. Mom. Leela stared at the page a long time before refolding it. Clara cleared her throat. I have something for the boys, she said. She rose and went to a small secretary desk in the corner, opened a drawer, and returned with a thin bundle of envelopes tied with kitchen twine. These were in the attic after Tom died. Bea asked me to hold them, said she couldn't keep them in the house, but couldn't throw them away either. She handed the bundle to Marcus. The top envelope was addressed to him in Beatrice's handwriting. The others were labeled similarly. One for Eleanor, one for Leela, one simply, for the grandchildren when they're old enough. Marcus untied the twine with careful fingers. Inside his envelope was a single sheet of the same cream stationery. Marcus, my steady boy, you were always the one who fixed things. Leaky faucets, broken toys, broken hearts when you could. I know you've been trying to fix this family since the day your father left us. Stop trying so hard. Some breaks are meant to stay open so light can get in. I'm sorry I let you carry guilt for not being there more. You were there exactly as much as you could be. That was enough. Be proud of the man you've become. Sarah is lucky. Your boys are lucky. And I was the luckiest of all to watch you grow. Love you past words. Mom. He read it silently, then passed it to Sarah, who had joined them quietly after dropping the boys at a friend's house. Tears slipped down her face as she read. Eleanor opened hers next. Eleanor, my runaway. You left because you had to. I know that now. I pushed too hard, wanted too much control. I was afraid if I let you go completely, I'd lose you the way I lost pieces of myself over the years. You built something beautiful out there. Don't ever apologize for it, but come home sometimes. Not out of duty, just because the door is open and there's coffee on. I forgave myself a little when I realized you were living the life I was too scared to chase. Be brave for both of us. Always your mother, B. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest. Leela's envelope held a shorter note. Leela, my sharp one. You see the world in straight lines and clean edges. I never did. That's why we clashed so much. But I admire it. You'll move mountains with that mind of yours. Don't let grief make you harder than you already are. Let it soften you instead. It's the only thing that ever softened me. I'm proud of you, even when I didn't say it. Mom. Leela stared at the page a long time before refolding it. Clara cleared her throat. I have something for the boys, she said. She rose and went to a small secretary desk in the corner, opened a drawer, and returned with a thin bundle of envelopes tied with kitchen twine. These were in the attic after Tom died. Bea asked me to hold them, said she couldn't keep them in the house, but couldn't throw them away either. She handed the bundle to Marcus. The top envelope was addressed to him in Beatrice's handwriting. The others were labeled similarly. One for Eleanor, one for Leela, one simply, for the grandchildren when they're old enough. Marcus untied the twine with careful fingers. Inside his envelope was a single sheet of the same cream stationery. Marcus, my steady boy, you were always the one who fixed things. Leaky faucets, broken toys, broken hearts when you could. I know you've been trying to fix this family since the day your father left us. Stop trying so hard. Some breaks are meant to stay open so light can get in. I'm sorry I let you carry guilt for not being there more. You were there exactly as much as you could be. That was enough. Be proud of the man you've become. Sarah is lucky. Your boys are lucky. And I was the luckiest of all to watch you grow. Love you past words. Mom. He read it silently, then passed it to Sarah, who had joined them quietly after dropping the boys at a friend's house. Tears slipped down her face as she read. Eleanor opened hers next. Eleanor, my runaway. You left because you had to. I know that now. I pushed too hard, wanted too much control. I was afraid if I let you go completely, I'd lose you the way I lost pieces of myself over the years. You built something beautiful out there. Don't ever apologize for it, but come home sometimes. Not out of duty, just because the door is open and there's coffee on. I forgave myself a little when I realized you were living the life I was too scared to chase. Be brave for both of us. Always your mother, B. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest. Leela's envelope held a shorter note. Leela, my sharp one. You see the world in straight lines and clean edges. I never did. That's why we clashed so much. But I admire it. You'll move mountains with that mind of yours. Don't let grief make you harder than you already are. Let it soften you instead. It's the only thing that ever softened me. I'm proud of you, even when I didn't say it. Mom. Leela stared at the page a long time before refolding it. Clara cleared her throat. I have something for the boys, she said. She rose and went to a small secretary desk in the corner, opened a drawer, and returned with a thin bundle of envelopes tied with kitchen twine.